Welcome to the first episode of the One School, One Planet podcast, where we'll be having conversations on the fertile edges of permaculture, ecology and education. So I'm here with Steve Jones. My name's Jack Hunter, and we're on a site called Cae Bodfach Community Orchard. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about that, Steve.
Oh yeah, thanks Jack. It's really interesting. It's a beautiful little space. So I'm just trying to remember when it was, but about 6 or 7 years ago, Bodfach Trust, which owns the land along by the River Cae here in Llanfyllin, donated 10 acres of land for use by the community, and we're allowed to do anything on it that we want, so long as the Llanfyllin Town Council has been kind of notified and they've approved. Mm-hmm. And in, I think it was 2014, we started an orchard project here, and at the time I was working with Cymharu in Newtown, and it was part of their Get Growing project. Maybe it was 2013, anyway, whenever it was. Yeah. And we had the idea of creating a heritage orchard. And you may realise that obviously there's hundreds, maybe thousands of apple species, and in our world of supermarkets, we generally only sort of eat 4 or 5 varieties. Yeah. So what we've done here is we've put in, I think, about so far 60 fruit trees, and every one is different. Yeah. So they all have a sort of a genetic difference, and they all kind of a heritage variety. And then alongside that, we've been underplanting the trees with comfrey, with herbs, with bee-friendly plants. And now we're embarking on a project to promote more sort of indigenous local herbs and dye plants.
Is that what this is to do with over here?
Yes. So one of our project volunteers, Grace, managed to raise a little bit of money from, I can't remember. Oops.
That's all right. Work it out later.
But towards making sort of an element to go within the orchard. And the element is a herb garden. Mm-hmm. And we've created a living willow structure, and we've created a sort of a little enclosed area around that. So the idea is it's kind of a play space, a focal point for the garden, and hopefully something to attract people in to come and, check it out. Yeah. And then we've laid down some geotextile, some fabric, mm-hmm. to sort of push back the grasses, and then we're just slowly planting through that with the herbs. And the idea is, obviously, as they get established and they sort of fill the space up, we'll then be able to transplant them out and slowly fill the field with herbs. And I mean, and the research that Grace did behind her project was that in the last 30 years, Wales has lost something like 94% of its herb-rich meadows. Mm. I mean, 94%. That's just... Anyway, so that's the thing bit behind Cae Bodfach.
That's great. And so the kids from the school have also been helping out quite a bit, haven't they?
It's been really... it's been great. It's been a really fun thing to do. What we've managed to do is, because each year we've come back and done another block of work, so we've been able to involve kids from the high school every year since we started. That's good. And some of them have planted fruit trees, some of them designed fruit tree guilds of plants as well. And we're now trying to promote that idea back to the school and hoping that they'll let us come and do similar things on the school campus as well.
Yeah, that's really good.
And and we've been trying to hold, every time to time we hold kind of regular work sessions down here, and we're obviously really always open it up to the community. We tweet as Cae _Bodfach, mm-hmm. by the way, CAE _BODFACH. If you want to follow us on Twitter, and whenever we're planning coming down here, we'll send out a tweet and come and join in. It's really open for everyone. Chance to contribute to the community and learn some new skills.
Yeah, and also to enhance biodiversity.
I grew up on a farm. My father was a farmer. We were tenant farmers, and we actually got ousted when I was about 10. So I grew up with this interest in farming. And then what happened was that what had been a little traditional farm, lots of little fields, different crops in each field, got bought up by some kind of management company who then just bulldozed it all flat and turned it all into a wheat field. And I'd grown up in playing in the woods and playing in the streams, and I knew all the about all the wildlife I'd observed, and I just I didn't have the words to kind of critique it, but what I saw happening, it just didn't feel right. So a theme within my life really has been trying to sort of learn how to sort of make the counter argument to, because I was taught, well, it's progress, it's the only way to do things, and technology and blah blah blah. So again, it's that type of development that's at the expense of the wildlife and biodiversity, which we so aware now that we've lost and destroyed. So I did a degree in sustainable development. It was before the Rio Earth Summit, so we didn't quite have the word sustainable, but it was essentially, that's what it was. And then I worked in development education. So I worked for a project in Reading that sort of developed teaching resources on controversial issues. And I gravitated towards the sort of environment part of that. I trained as a teacher. I got PGC in business studies and economics, which kind of sat with the development degree, I guess. And then rather than going straight into teaching, I then went and spent 4 years in Africa, travelling around. And it was there I got involved in permaculture. I didn't know, I hadn't heard of it before. And what I experienced in Zimbabwe was permaculture projects already quite well established. And even without knowing the word permaculture, I was impressed by what I saw. And so to me, it was always a global thing. It was very much permaculture was always about doing it rather than talking about it.
Maybe you could just explain what permaculture actually is. Probably a big...
Well, there's a big one. But the short answer is it's a design system based on modelling from nature. And it says, if we want to be sustainable, if we want to be regenerative, if we want to sort of copy what the properties, amazing properties that natural systems have, then nature's our teacher. And permaculture tries to sort of synthesise those observations into a design formula. So, and you can apply it to anything, but obviously gardens and farms and food growing systems are pretty important, so it's a good place to start.
Yeah, you could expand it out to culture, society.
Absolutely, how you design a business or economy or social network, they all kind of conform to the same kind of pattern archetypes that we observe in nature.
Yeah, so the idea is the more in tune our systems are with natural systems, then in theory they should be more sustainable.
The less inputs they need. And you see, natural systems aren't even sustainable, they're regenerative. Left to their own devices, they grow in complexity, they include new species, they become more diverse, and they become more interconnected. So there's the model. It's not, all this time we've been trying to be sustainable. That's a mistake, trying to keep things as they are. We actually have to push things in the other direction. Or we're getting some rain now. Shall we?
Real rain, yeah.
Okay. Should we do the next segment in the car?
Yeah. We're just going to make our way to the car because it's really raining now.
Yeah, so Jack, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and how you got here and your cool interests?
Yeah, my main interest really is kind of trying to tie together my anthropological interests. So I am an anthropologist by training, and my main research interests are sort of to do with religion and spirituality, things like that. And although it might seem like there's a gulf between the kind of research that I do and permaculture, actually I think there's some really kind of strong bridges between them as well. And I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, and one of the strong bridges that I think there is to do with understanding other kinds of minds, other ways of thinking, and other different kinds of consciousness. So like we were talking about how natural systems should be, how our systems should be in tune with natural systems. Well, learning how to understand those natural systems is like learning how to understand another kind of mind. Like it's like the mind of nature that we're trying to tune ourselves in with.
Yeah, and people like Paul Stamets have said specifically that he believes that nature's intelligent, that mycelial networks represent intelligence. Why not?
Yeah, exactly.
Why shouldn't it be?
Yeah, so we need to reconnect with those kind of more natural, natural ways of thinking, or I don't really know how to term it, but that's where my interest is at the moment.
It's really fascinated me talking to you a bit about what your study been doing, because I've always felt that permaculture is rooted in observation. I always say it doesn't require belief. It's no more profound than saying water flows downhill or organic matter decays to compost. Very hard to argue about those facts.
Yeah.
Whereas your realm, to me, seems more like it's coming from the world of belief.
Yep.
And there's a very interesting kind of interface, isn't there, between belief and observation? You know, because sometimes you have to suspend. I don't know. To sustain a belief system, you've got to kind of suspend belief a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, I would argue probably that my approach is not so much to do with belief, and it's more to do with experience.
Okay.
So the kinds of things that I'm interested in are usually rooted in, or from my perspective, they seem to be rooted in experience first, and then belief is something that comes later. So if you're researching religion, for example, and you're only researching religious beliefs, then you're not actually researching the real thing.
Right, yes.
You see what I mean?
Yes.
So I think that's where the connection is between, observation and permaculture and religious experience or whatever. It's to do with the way we experience and interact with this other mind out there, or this other thing. You don't need to believe it. If you go out into the field and experience and feel it, then it's about changing the way we think about the world.
And I think, especially when you look at more traditional cultures, is, I mean, it's not, like you say, it's experiential, and it's how they understand their place within the world is how they survive.
Yeah, and that's it. It comes back to this. Well, I link it in with this idea of, from deep ecology, this idea of an ecosophy, which is a kind of like a philosophy of place, or a philosophy that's emerged from a particular place. And that's exactly what we see when we look at indigenous cultures all around the world. Their way of living has emerged naturally out of the environment that they live in. And our problem in the West seems to be that we've developed one particular way of doing things, and then we're trying to apply it across a whole range of situations where it doesn't really work. We need to be reconnecting with our local environments in this way, developing our own ecosophies.
Right. So it's like this, the kind of science we developed in test tubes. It works and it's observable and real, but when you apply that to natural systems, it just can never understand the complexity and dynamics of a natural system.
Yeah.
And again, this is part of how by oversimplifying things, we've created these enormous problems for ourselves, because we've gone into a growing environment and said, well, we want to grow carrots, and everything else is a weed, it's an enemy and has to be removed. But we know that the soil wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the worms, and the worms wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the microbes that they're digesting it, etc., etc. And without the worms, there's no birds, and birds cycle phosphate and maintain fertility. Yeah. So actually, in this simplistic thing of just thinking about one thing and trying to simplify nature, that's at the heart of how we've caused these really colossal problems.
So perhaps re-engaging with nature on an experiential, your first impressions of nature kind of level. You can build a new relationship with it. That's why I think it's so good getting kids down onto the orchard, because they're building their new relationship with their local environment. Absolutely,
and it really excites me that in some ways that they feel they've contributed to this or setting something in motion with this orchard. And I've been trying to impress on them, saying, well, this, your kids might be benefiting from this, and it might, your grandchildren even.
I think also tapping into that long-range thinking that you were talking about the other day with Paul Stamets. And
yes.
The way the mycelium thinks in
It thinks in millennia.
Yeah. Well, we need to start thinking in those kinds of long-range terms as well. And I think that also ties back into that idea I was talking about of trying to understand another way of thinking, another way of mind, like the way that the mind of a mycelium works.
It's really fascinating when you start thinking about it. It really is, and it also, I just keep getting an idea of the absolute arrogance of humans. We've called ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, the wise people.
Yeah,
and yet somehow we've created this very simplistic idea of the world, and it's backfiring horribly right now because the ice caps are melting, and we don't know how to get ourselves to change our behaviours in the time frame required. I mean, it's not very sapiens as far as I'm concerned.
No.
I was just reflecting on, I've just planted a blackcurrant tree here underneath this lovely cherry tree.
Yeah.
That looks like a cherry tree, doesn't it? In the Cae Bodfach Orchard. And there was a worm in the pot that had been kind of isolated all alone for the whole of the last year, but it looked quite happy. So I was just speculating what it might be thinking as it rejoins the earth and rejoins its brethren.
Yeah.
A little worm reunion going on down there. Of course, Charles Darwin was fascinated about worms. It was one of the things that gave him absolute insight into how nature works. And essentially, he realised we all owe our existence to worms.
Yeah.
Our food comes from the topsoil. If it wasn't for healthy topsoil, we wouldn't be here. And worms are habitat builders. They create new living opportunities.
Yeah.
They fluff up the soil and aerate it, create holes where water and air can infiltrate deep into the ground, and mix all the different layers together. And of course, even in their gut, it's full of bacteria, and those bacteria bind together the soil particles and just basically make it more fertile. And it's that interdependence that we really are interested in permaculture. We realise nothing in nature, nothing lives in isolation. We're all the product of lots of interactions with other species.
Yep.
All of those species adding together creates the biosphere, creates this living planetary system that we're part of.
And we're a part of that as well. That's the important thing.
We're absolutely integrated into it. Yeah. And we kind of rather foolishly constructed this idea where we see the environment as being outside of ourselves. There's the human realm, and then there's the environment, nature's realm, and utterly absurd, utterly flawed thinking. And that's very much it. Oh, look, it's a pheasant.
Oh, yeah.
A beautiful cock pheasant just strolling past in our orchard. It's that detachment from the environment that has enabled us to pollute, to damage, to sort of erode into it at this colossal rate. And this is the thing that we will have to evolve in terms of our consciousness and our awareness, is to reintegrate the environment back into our thinking, back and really importantly back into our economic models. Okay. Someone's just given me a copy of the book Doughnut Economics. And forgive me, I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but it's exactly that. It's a sort of basic. It's economic thinking for the 21st century is going to be about, very rapidly as well, reintegrating the environment back into our sort of thinking, costing, systems and value systems.
It needs to be reintegrated back into our educational system as well.
Which beautifully brings us back to the purpose of the podcast, One School, One Planet. We started this project from the basic realisation that the curriculum has to change, and to create this kind of understanding that we now realise we have to achieve. We're going to have to re-educate ourselves, or re-engineer slightly the educational process, so that kids leaving school fully understand these things.
Yeah, that's one of the good things about these kinds of projects, because it actually gets the kids out into the field, touching, feeling the soil and the earth and making that connection, planting trees.
So important. I mean, education has just increasingly become something that happens inside your head, hasn't it? And that's just only amplified with the sort of computer on-screen world that we now live in. So, the value of getting kids outside, getting some mud under the fingernails.
Even in the countryside.
Yes, I know. And here we are in the middle of beautiful Welsh countryside, and the kids hardly ever seem to go outside anymore. I mean, Hi, so we're here with Steve Pickup, our first guest on our little podcast. And Steve, you're from the Willow Bank. You're a willow specialist. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you get into willow, and what's the big deal about willow?
Well, I first got into willow quite by accident, to be honest. I inherited or took over a piece of land in mid-Wales, trying to make money from the land, trying to make a living from the land in a variety of different ways. All of them failed. In the meantime, I planted some willow on a piece of wet, boggy ground because I couldn't think of anything else to do with it. So I inadvertently applied a permaculture principle of listen to the land and go with the land. Let the land dictate what you do with the land. And now I have a willow business, and all the other businesses completely failed. So even before I heard of permaculture, I was following permaculture principles, and that led me to Willow. So you could say Willow discovered me rather than me discovering Willow.
That's really great. Now, we've been working a bit with Llanfyllin High School. A lot of the children there are farmers, and we've been trying to get them to think about the Paris Climate Agreement, climate change, carbon sequestration, and all the what they said were things along the lines of, why are you blaming farmers? And didn't like the idea of being held responsible, and I can understand that. But also they said very strongly, look, we're in the business of making money. Farming's about making money. It's not necessarily about doing these big environmental things. And I guess we've been trying to argue you can do both. And we've just been sat looking at some numbers with you, and we can see actually this willow's a very productive crop. It creates a biomass yield, so it could be used for anything, for energy, or for for planting more willow, or for whatever, building living structures like we've done here. But also you could pyrolyze it. You could turn it into charcoal, and that charcoal represents captured and stored carbon. And so these things has a value. It contributes to the environment. It contributes to wildlife and biodiversity. So there's a lot of different potential yields around this. Could you just enlarge on that a little bit too? I mean, we've just been chatting about this, so it's fascinating to think of the potential yields and how this might perhaps be interesting to farmers.
Yes, well, you've touched upon just a few of the uses of and applications of willow, and there are dozens and dozens of different things you can do with willow. One thing that is gaining popularity these days is bioengineering.
Right.
It's been used for stabilising riverbanks and waterways, and helping to increase the environmental value of the waterways, and also to prevent flooding downstream. This is something that is a hot topic at the moment. Using willow as a crop to produce a crop which is useful, which is valuable for a variety of purposes, but also has an ameliorating effect on the local landscape, particularly in the upper reaches of water catchment areas. A lot of the land in upland areas in this country, in Wales and England, has been tampered with, let's say, whether for farming or for forestry or for grouse shooting, for example.
We only have to look at the landscape over there, and we just see a green baize of improved pasture. That means a lot of nitrates being chucked on that, and those nitrates, when it rains, end up in the watercourse, and we're in a very environmentally sensitive area. So willow is something that could actually mop up and absorb and use those mobile nutrients.
It can. On the continent, they use willow they plant willow as buffer zones along important waterways. Right. And they basically capture agricultural runoff, which can be seen, if it gets into the river, is essentially a pollutant, and damages the life in the river. But it can also be seen as a resource in terms of that is wasted fertility.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's used as a fertiliser, but it's not actually fertilising anything, it's just running off the land. Whereas if it's intercepted by willow is very good at turning available resources into willow biomass, and that is very valuable. Again, it's good for the environment, it's good for wildlife, good for habitat, it's good for people too in a variety of different ways.
Brilliant.
Are there any benefits that you can think of for young people and kids getting involved with willow?
Well, one thing I've noticed with people getting involved with willow, because we often run workshops working with people, and quite often we do it on a drop-in, drop-out basis, so people just wandering around at a fair or something see us doing something with willow. We were doing something at Royal Ascot Grounds racecourse a few weeks ago for one of their events, and there were basically queues all day long. Wow. People had to queue to get a turn to make something out of willow. Yeah. And I think what it is, the thing about weaving willow is weaving willow was one of the very first human crafts practiced way back in prehistoric times. Because if you think about it, even before before flint tools were developed, people were able to break small thin sticks and weave them with their hands without the use of tools. Yeah. And in fact, the first shards of pottery that have been discovered have willow patterns in them. Clay was put around woven willow pots and fired in open fires. So I think what happens is when people start weaving, they really get in touch with that ancient craft. Something inside. It's like
it's hardwired inside.
It's hardwired into the collective memory. Because up until very, very recently, virtually every village throughout the northern hemisphere would have had a willow bed. Everything that is now stored or transported in cardboard or plastic would have been stored or transported in willow containers or baskets. That's not that long ago.
No.
That's within the last 100 years.
Yeah, right.
And from that time right back to prehistory, people have been growing and weaving willow for a variety of for virtually everything that was stored or transported.
Yeah. That's interesting, with this increased consciousness around plastic pollution. Suddenly, there's your alternative, right, to the plastic bag is the basket.
Yeah.
Everything was in baskets, as you said.
Yeah.
That would have been the universal carrying thing, and when it breaks, biodegrades, no problem.
Yeah, and not only for storing and carrying things, but for catching things as well.
Yeah, right, of course.
I had a visit a couple of years ago from someone on the River Severn who still had the right to put out salmon putchers in the Severn. And although he tends to use, most of his putchers are actually metal, because obviously they last a long time in the water, he still likes to use a certain percentage made out of willow. And believe it or not, he catches better quality salmon in the willow putchers. And the reason for that is because as the salmon struggle in the metal putchers, they damage themselves on the hard metal, whereas the willow is able to give with the thrashing about of a salmon. So the salmon that are caught in the willow putchers are not damaged.
Interesting, isn't it? The whole working with organic materials, everything changes. It's a different prospect, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
It's great, Steve. Thanks for your thoughts. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool.
This episode of our podcast is presented from Cae Bodfach Orchard, but in the coming weeks we're hoping to change the format a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, we're interested to see that the Cross Keys, the Lower Cross Keys, I believe it's called, which was a pub in Llanfyllin, and it's been empty for at least, I think, 5 years now. And relatively recently it's been purchased by a couple who want to open up the pub part of it as a community space. So so we had a couple. It's part of what triggered off the idea. Really, is we want to engage with the community more about the themes within the One School, One Planet project. Personally, I don't understand why everybody isn't getting up and talking about climate change every day, because it's such an enormous, impending, imminent, all-encompassing problem that challenges every area of our life. So I've always felt we should be preparing ourselves for this much, much more. Yeah. And this crazy kind of wacky weather that we're getting at the moment is probably only a portent for what's going to happen, what's going to come. So the idea is, as communities, we need to be a bit more prepared. We need to be more engaged with each other. No matter what kind of challenges we face, we'll face them more effectively if we're working together, if we're more integrated together. Yeah. So the idea then of using this community space seemed kind of like an obvious start. Hopefully a welcoming space that people feel comfortable to come into. And then we thought what we'd try and do is have a series of these podcast recordings live in the Cross Keys. So maybe invite one or two interesting guests to talk to, and have it open there for people to join in. Yeah,
and we're going to structure each of the episodes around particular themes. So things like transport, food,
economy.
Yeah,
I think for example, I'm fascinated. I originally trained as an economics teacher before I got into permaculture. Which is systems thinking again, really interestingly. And I'm fascinated by what's happening to the global economy. I'm fascinated by cryptocurrencies, by Bitcoin. And I think it opens up a whole new world of opportunities that we can only begin to guess what that might be about. Yeah. Again, surely these are things that we could be talking about.
Yeah, we won't know until we start talking about it.
Absolutely. So, I'm really actually excited by the prospect of that. And Yeah, and if it records it, it focuses our attention a bit more, and and hopefully we'll create a useful sort of product, a useful output, which